Under a sky the color of old tin, I stood at the highway pull-off with my breath hanging in the mist like something that had second thoughts about leaving me. The mountain across the guardrail had its shoulders hunched, dark spruce stacked up the slope like the backs of sleeping animals. 15 years guiding in that range had taught me the manners of the place. What wind keeps, what water steals, and how long the silence could sit on your chest without cracking a rib. But that morning carried a weight I couldn't name. The quiet had the grain of attention. The woods didn't just lie there, they angled toward me. I drank the last throat scorch of thermos coffee and thumbed the taped edge on my map, the one the rain had been gnawing for 3 seasons. I told myself I was early because I like my head to arrive before my client does. Truth. I wanted to hear what the mountain sounded like when it thought no one was listening. The SUV came up the grade slow and deliberate, matte black, windows tinted just enough that the forest tried to look at itself in them. When it pulled beside me and cut its engine, the absence of that hum hit my ears as if it had weight. The driver's window sank, and the man inside said my name the way a surveyor sets a pin, firm enough to be permanent, casual enough to be overlooked. He called himself Harrow, and I let that be true. He climbed out with a walking stick capped in brass, so smooth it looked wet, a leather attaché that didn't belong under trees, and a box swaddled in oilcloth and strapped tight like something alive might try to get out. No rifle, no cooler, no case clacking with call reeds or cartridges. Just the suggestion of a traveler who had packed for a different kind of distance. I've guided all kinds. Money in new boots, humility in old ones, couples who believed the woods would do marriage better than counseling, men who wanted something to bleed for reasons they would never admit. My shorthand for people rarely fails me. With Harrow, everything in me kept the pencil hovering. His face didn't hunt for an expression. It waited for the correct weather to arrive. When he lifted his eyes to the ridge, I felt like the ridge flinched. There's a question clients ask in one form or another, usually before the first mile is given up. What are we hunting? I prefer when they don't know themselves. Harrow asked nothing. I locked the truck, slung the pack that has worn the same bruise into my hip for a decade, clipped my small brass bell where it always goes on my shoulder strap, and we stepped into the trees without ceremony. The trail always starts smug, cut clean, chatter of juncos, an occasional glance from a squirrel offended by your existence. Then it thins to a single file of brown and roots, then it dissolves. That's the place I sell, where maps behave like rumors and compasses like opinions. He moved well enough. I didn't have to pretend to tie a boot just to let him breathe. But he didn't walk like a man who trusted the ground. He walked like a man checking a story against its source. Sound went wrong before the light did. A knocking drifted down the draw to our right. 3 taps spaced like a measured thought. The echo took too long to return and came back with corners. You learn to blame woodpeckers and ravens for that sort of thing, even when you know better. I blamed them aloud and watched the way Harrow did not. We passed blazes I didn't like. Not the white rectangles the service slaps on trunks. Not the orange tape weekenders tie on like they're leaving breadcrumbs for wolves. Triangles, shallow cut, old enough to be gray with lichen, but somehow cleaner underneath than the bark around them. Whoever made those marks wanted a path that could be read and argued with at the same time. I put a glove finger on one and felt cold slip under the leather as if it had been waiting there. We didn't stop until the timber burned open around us. A slope lightning had eaten long ago, but never finished chewing. Charred trunks stood at angles like they were still remembering flame. Between them, new green rose in tidy grids that had no business being tidy. At the center was a stump with nails hammered into its rings. Each nail bent over like a finger broken and set wrong. Resin had domed over the heads, amber beads with bark frozen inside them as though the tree had tried to heal around each intrusion and learned to keep the pain. Harrow set the oilcloth bundle on the stump's flat top and unbuckled the straps without lifting the lid. The way he handled the thing suggested he'd named it privately and was trying not to say that name even to his hands. When he did open it, there lay 4 objects: a white stone round as a fist and polished milk smooth, a coil of thin red cord, a jar clouded by something suspended inside that refused to settle, and a scrap of paper softened by folding until it looked like fabric. He touched each like it could answer questions or hold a grudge. "Don't step in the circle," he said, though the dirt showed nothing besides the ordinary confusions. Deer slots, a fox's purposeful punctuation, our own boot ovals smudged by needles. "There isn't one," I said, and he said good in a tone that made me want to count the places my shadow fell. He tied knots in a red cord I could not explain to myself even while I watched. They turned wrong and then right again, made angles out of curves, bit their own slack and held it. I know rope. I've hung tarps in wind that hated me and slung lines over river crossings that wanted to take men. This was not rope work. This was writing in a grammar I did not speak. We dropped into the basin before dusk, a bowl with fir-rimmed walls and a spring that stitched itself up through quartz and whispered away. The hush, there was an absence of sound. It was the presence of something that has learned to sit very still. I made a fire the size of a prayer and no bigger. Harrow balanced his walking stick between two stones and set the white stone dead center on it, where gravity should have laughed. The stone didn't roll. The jar stayed sealed, the cloudy inside it doing its slow, patient spin. "When it comes," he said, "don't look at it. You'll know where it is by where it isn't." He didn't need to say the rest. The rules of certain places arrive before the place does. Don't repeat what it says. Don't carry anything for it. Don't claim you were uninvited when your feet are already in the house. It came with a smell I have never stopped being able to taste. Wet stone, yes, but under it the thin sour of something pressed under weight for a long time and then lifted too quickly. The fire made a noise like a small animal trying not to be heard. The spring sounded farther away. Somewhere on the basin rim, brush arranged itself into a suggestion of a shape and then took that shape away again, leaving only the indentation in my attention where it had been. It said my name in my own cadence, the vowels worn in the way my sister used to wear them when she called me home from the culvert, where the storm runoff roared louder than my mother's voice. The word landed on the back of my neck like a moth. I felt my mouth begin to answer. I shut it against my teeth, so hard my jaw ached. Harrow's voice appeared near my ear without moving air. "Don't." There was a child's timbre next, the same sentence, the same soft accusation threaded through it. "You promised you'd be back before dark." Promises have the shape of rooms. They remember the furniture after you move it out. I felt the old summer pull in my legs. The culvert rimmed slick, my sister's laugh brightened by fear she didn't yet recognize as fear. The basin went shallower in front of me, deeper behind me. "If you carry anything for it," Harrow said, and his tone did not have to rise above the fire's whisper to be absolute. "You belong to it." The chuckle that answered him was dry leaves stirred under a door by a draft in a house you haven't entered in years. "I have other mules." The basin thawed at us, and the place where my name had sat grew heavier, as if a hand had pressed on a bruise to see how old it was. I've been scared in simple ways, grisly, close, and curious, water colder than you expected after you committed your weight to it, lightning that tastes the fillings in your teeth, and in complicated ones. Help too far to matter, a client bleeding more than he can imagine bleeding, a radio that will not find anyone. This was neither. This was the sensation of being noticed by something that did not need anything I had, but that collected anyway. It did not breathe, but the air around it inhaled and exhaled in a rhythm that picked up the rhythm under my ribs and taught it to match. It spoke to Harrow in a tone not unlike my sister's and not unlike my own, and he answered with sentences that had no verbs, only the bones of meaning. There was a promise, yes. There was a ledger, yes. There was a thing kept and a thing owed and a thing brought. He didn't say what he had brought because the jar, even closed, had begun to define the space it occupied the way a body defines a bed even after you've gotten up. When it left, it did so the way hunger leaves after you feed it. A ghost of it swivels in your stomach as if remembering the chair it sat in. The moon rose, or else the sky remembered how. Harrow set the stone carefully on the oilcloth, nestled the jar beside it, as if it might bruise, and lay down with his eyes open. I had no sleep to offer, so I gave the darkness a stare instead and let it weigh it. He moved us at first light without coffee. without the clatter of ordinary preparations. The mountain had taken an interest. You don't scratch when the mountain itches. We traversed west toward an old logging tramway that sags between towers made rotten by the kind of rain that goes in and doesn't come out. The cable sang in a wind that promised nothing. The car lay on its side with glass made smooth by moss, a sleeping thing that had learned to dream the forest dreams. Along the ground at the foot of the posts, a path had been kept, moss peeled back from a line no wider than a bootlace, twigs cut clean and laid parallel, tin cans stacked with labels turned in as if they didn't want their names read. Care like that either belongs to a child or to a discipline so old it has become a child again. He took a device from his coat that I had no name for. It had a dial under glass that didn't reflect and a needle that trembled toward not north. When he turned his body, the needle changed its mind in tiny ways and then fixed itself again with a certainty my compass hasn't possessed in years. West draw, he said, but he wasn't telling me. He was assuring the needle there would be obedience. There were iron stakes driven flush to the soil along our way, stamped with numbers whose corners should have worn round and never had. I said survey because it is comforting to allow that everything you step over belongs to a discipline that writes things down. He said older and let the word take more space than it should. We walked under a silence that had the quality of withheld laughter. Those are the worst kinds. I will give you the moment it all moved from odd to undeniable. We reached a notch between two ribs of rock where the wind always throws itself in two directions at once and comes back disoriented. And there, in the narrow shade, lay a bit of line that needed no interpretation. Not blueprints, not pause. Something like a person had come through, making choices a person would make about where to place weight, but the stride was wrong in a way that spoke of intention, not injury. The distance between left and right had a child's memory and an adult's correction. If you've ever seen an old farmhouse floor where the boards tell you how generations have walked a hallway, hip on this side because someone carried, hip on that because someone stopped, you'll know the feeling. The path wasn't for us, it was about us. I could not place the taste in my mouth until Harrow's odd needle lifted, quivered, and settled, pointing toward a bowl of pines that held shadow even at noon. The taste was something I get the hour after I tell a lie to a good dog. I have never liked the part of myself that lies to creatures that deserve better. He set the box down in that bowl with a gentleness that made the pines lean toward him even if the wind said otherwise. He coiled the red cord in a pattern that would have made a spider feel clumsy. He set the white stone where it could witness the cord's decisions. He turned the jar in his hands as if the cloudy would offer him one true window if only he found the right angle. He did not say the name of the thing we had come to address. He did not need to. The mountain had already turned its head. It is important to be plain here, because plainness is the only honesty that can survive afterward. The presence that arrived to meet us did not enter. Our attention drained out of what it had been soaking and pooled somewhere new, and that pool had edges. That's how I knew where not to look. The more I tried to keep my gaze away, the more precise the edges became, like cold defining fingers in February. I could have drawn it without once allowing my eyes to land. Memory gathered in that place the way static gathers in an old jacket. My sister's laugh pinged off the rock, younger than we were when we last spoke. My mother's warning took a shape in my ear that it didn't have when she breathed it. The first bull elk I ever watched throw his antlers in frost. How the breath came out of him as if the world had been waiting specifically for that breath, stood out of season just beyond the cords, and looked at me with a person's patience. I told myself the mind can make ghosts out of hunger and out of grief and out of crackling firelight. Then it said my name again, and the syllables were bent just wrong enough that I wanted to fix them with my mouth. I don't know what made Harrow decide that he'd paid enough attention. Perhaps the needle stilled in a way only he could understand. Perhaps the jar grew heavier on his palms. Perhaps there are clocks that don't tick or talk, but instead press a thumb into your sternum when it's time. He cracked the jar. No scent escaped. No vapor. Just a change in pressure, the sort of shift a room makes when a second door opens somewhere behind you. The red cord lifted off the ground without a hand's help, and took slack, as if something inside the pattern had tightened its belt. The white stone warmed the air above it. The jar's cloudy took on a roundness like a pearl learning to be itself. I felt words seeking my mouth like fish noses at the surface of a still pond, and forced my lips to refuse them. Never repeat what it says. Never carry anything for it. Hold the emptiness as if it weighed something. Harrow's voice moved like an old man who has walked the same path to a grave so many times he no longer stumbles over the roots. He said there had been promises, and he said there had been returns, and he said there had been changes in the way the witness chooses to remember. And that last sentence felt like he had put a scalpel on a nerve I didn't know I had. The presence pushed back with nothing a mouth could call words, but with all the authority a river uses to argue with a downstream rock. Harrow did not escalate, only repeated the posture of his voice, and you should know that posture matters when vocabulary stops being useful. Something came loose in the air between us that made me think of a tooth freed from gum. Clean, inevitable, a relief that doesn't know where to sit. The red cord sagged. The white stone cooled. He put the lid back on the jar with the care of a man who has just gathered his last good thing. The presence remained, but its edges softened, and when it spoke my name again, it did so without the hook. While I had expected to be triumph felt, instead, like when you finally get warm after a long cold and your body remembers too much at once and trembles with the remembering. You will want a tidy explanation for what the jar then contained. I've learned the world isn't kind to tidy explanations. It eats them first. The jar looked exactly as it had. He slid it into the box, as if the box had been made for nothing else. He laid the red cord on top and the stone beside, and he wrapped oilcloth around the lot, as if it were a child being sent to sleep in a house that has kept children safe. We left quietly. There's a style to retreat that keeps it from being surrender. Don't turn your back. Don't walk too slow. Don't walk too fast. Know the number of your steps until you cross the place where numbers belong to you again. On the tram line, the cable sang low. On the burn scar, the wind forgot our names. At the stream, some invisible knuckle rapped 3 times in the wrong rhythm and produced no echo at all. The brass bell on my shoulder gave its small voice, and I could hear, within its jingle, a ring it had not possessed before, as if the metal had been tempered overnight by more than frost. We reached the pull-off under weather that had decided to stop auditioning for drama. Harrow slid the box onto the back seat, like you put a prayer down on a chair when your knees are tired. He told me where to send the invoice, though the money had long since cleared. He did not offer thanks and did not withhold it. The transaction had been made with a third party that neither of us managed. He drove away with the careful aggression of a man who knows that roads are just agreements and can be rescinded. The mountain is not a ledger you can ask to show its math. It balances in ways that benefit no accounting. Still, over the next weeks the town lightened like a pack after a hard ridge. Men old enough to be my father began losing arguments about small things and smiling about it. A woman I'd never met stepped onto the gas station porch and touched the doorway like she hadn't known it would be there, and then stepped through without apology. I slept once without my jaw clenched and woke with the taste of pine needles and iron gone. A kid who used to stare at the pavement while walking started looking up and whistling a tune a radio station used to play before a storm took its tower. Then the other changes came, the ones that proved what price had been paid. I met a man by the beer cooler who knew my name as if he'd helped sand it. He told me a story about camping at Oxbow above the Knife Ridge, about waking to the rope of wind under the tarp, about a morning when we'd had to melt snow for water because the spring had decided to be stoned that day. He told it with my detail. He told it with my impatience for inaccuracy. I had never seen his face. There are thefts you only recognize when they wear your boots. I smiled for him and nodded and carried out my groceries and sat in my truck a long time, tasting old summers, deciding which of those I could spare. A package arrived from Harrow when the plows had given up on the last drifts. Inside was a map of the West Draw with triangulations in a hand that belonged to someone who had taught their wrist to lie to rulers without getting caught, and a thin book that showed knots that worked better in dreams, and a note. Off the map is a direction, not a void. Someone else had written witness in the lower margin, so faint that it only showed when you turned the paper to catch slant light. I started hearing the 3 knocks in normal places, barns when I walked past, the hollow pipes under the garage sink when the heater kicked on, a porch post in a thaw as it gave a single complaint and then chose to carry on. I never answered. I never echoed. Echo is not safe currency. I kept guiding. I told the couples which ridge gives you light enough for a photo and shadow enough to look like you have survived something you haven't. I told flatland men when to pretend they weren't winded so pride wouldn't make their next step stupid. I taught new guides how to sleep with one ear inside the bag and one outside it, and how to keep brass polished and bells honest, and how to refuse to repeat the dead even when the dead offer the words with your own voice attached. Sometimes I drive up to the pull-off before dawn to hear what the guardrail thinks about the weight of cold. The mountain breathes differently at that hour, slower and deeper, as if the ranges on either side were taking turns at the same set of lungs. I say my name once the way I learned to say it as a child, and once the way the basin said it back to me, and I wait. The echo returns now in the right time. I do not trust it, which is a way of respecting it. I will finish with the thing most useful to anyone who has read this far for the wrong reasons. If you go looking, the mountain will be kind enough to give you what you deserve. Don't step into circles you cannot see. Assume there is a circle. Keep your shadow on a short leash. Never carry anything handed to you across darkness, even if your fingers don't register its weight. Names are handles. Don't pick up what you can't put down. If something tells you it has other mules, believe it, and spend the rest of your life making sure it cannot inventory you. And if you find yourself in a bowl rimmed with fir and stone where the spring whispers through quartz and the fire wants to burn blue no matter how well you stack the fuel, and if the air tastes like wet rock and buried regret, and if the voice that speaks your name has your own breath in it and your sister's laugh braided through, do not answer. Hold your mouth shut like a door in wind. Let the thing ask all night. Let it try every key. Dawn will not rescue you. Dawn will only change the questions you understand. But if you keep your hands empty, you may be allowed to leave carrying nothing. In certain places, nothing is the heaviest thing you are permitted to bring home. I still know where the nails shine through resin on the old stump. I still know how the red cord took corners where there weren't any. I still feel the edge of emptiness when it passes through a room like a weather front that only touches the heart. On good nights, I dream of quiet water and wake with only thirst. On bad ones, I wake to a hand pressing gently on the bruise of my name from the inside, and I lie still until the pressure recedes. The mountain is older than bargains. It will outlast my honesty and my cowardice both. My arrogance, at least, I have learned to set down. The rest rides in my pack like the bell, a small bright thing that works less by scaring beasts and more by reminding me I wore it for a reason. When I hear it, I know where I am. When I don't, I count my steps until numbers belong to me again. If anyone asks what I guide, I still say hunting trips. It is easier that way. But the truth is this. Sometimes I am hired to walk into the deep places and stand as a witness while another witness notices us. Sometimes I'm asked to help a man ask for something back that cannot be described. Sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes it goes the other way. The mountain does not care about those words. The mountain keeps its own language. If you listen long enough, you begin to understand it has been speaking in yours all along, and you're only now learning what you had already promised.